going to create a middle class? No, it's like I said before, you can only create a middle class or a 40-hour work week or weekends is when the economy is productive enough to allow that kind of situation to occur. You can't create a middle class in a place like Africa where people are not productive, where governments are corrupt, where people can't even feel safe in their own homes, and it's just chaos. Good luck with that. Just, yeah, send Richard Trump over there and see what he can do in Africa. He didn't like that either. He says, well, I guess that's where we disagree. I go, yeah, of course. Because how does what you're saying make any sense? And, okay.
I'll make a point on that. Actually, the one country in the world that has no labor unions, and it actually has more people that have the U.S. definition of middle class income, has more than we have, is China. And which is very interesting. And in fact, there was almost no middle class by that definition in 1990, and today they have about 40 million more people than we have that have that level of income.
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, that in itself is clear evidence that unions don't create the middle class.
Yeah. It's just, again, it's just correlation does not imply causation.
Right.
You could just as easily make the argument that the middle class created labor unions. Or the only reason labor unions can exist is because there is a middle class. And the reason that labor unions became so influential and so powerful during the 1950s, for a couple of decades after the Second World War, is because they had an environment in which they could operate like a monopoly. They had a lot of leverage. American industry was the only game on the entire planet. Europe, Asia was in ruins. American car companies didn't have any competition. Mercedes, BMW, Toyota, they were just piles of rubble. And so the United States industrial base had the field all to itself for something like 2 decades. They just wanted to keep those assembly lines running. And so when the unions threatened to strike and said we want more wages, the companies just said okay, because there was no competition to keep prices down. They could just pass the cost on to the consumer. And that was another point that one of the guys who given testimony down in Madison said, you know, the labor unions, like the United Auto Workers, can point to their workers and say, look, we're making $70 an hour in wages and benefits. And they could do that. They got away with it for a while. But as soon as the Japanese and the German and the British, or the European car companies, and those Asian car companies in Japan and Korea and stuff, got on board with new factories and were able to produce cars, suddenly there was competition and Americans started buying foreign cars. Now the American car companies, they couldn't keep raising prices. And so guess what? The labor unions basically killed the goose that laid the golden eggs. And so, you know, this business about labor unions creating the middle class, no, that was a very artificial situation. And that was not a reflection of long-term reality. The reality is now. Now we're competing on a level playing field, especially since 1989, when the Iron Curtain came down. Suddenly we had hundreds of millions of workers in Eastern Europe and Soviet Union, China, even India, which had a socialist economic model, decided this ain't working, toss it overboard, let's embrace free market capitalism. Now, how can the American worker and the American companies, manufacturing companies, compete against workers that are just as well educated as we are, just as talented as we are, just as strong as we are? All they need is the same kind of technology in factories over there, and off they go. And they want to make money too. They want to become middle-class citizens. And instead, they're not demanding $70 an hour in compensation and benefits and wages. They're happy to make a lot less than that, because they'll still be way better off. So we're just going to have to get used to that and appreciate that golden age that we had for a brief period of time, a couple of decades. But yeah, again, I could sit here and talk about minimum wage. There's arguments pro and con, and there's studies showing this and that, and you can toss a coin, and I mean, I can run down some arguments if you want to hear some, pro and con. If you're curious, I can give you a sampling of what they throw out. For example, arguments in favor of minimum wage laws. Results in American job growth and creation. Well, the argument there is that when a person is making more money, they have more money to go out and spend, and that stimulates the economy. And the thing is, though, is that money didn't grow on trees. If you hadn't given it in the form of higher wages, in the form of a higher minimum wage to a worker, it would have been spent somewhere else in the economy. So it's pretty much of a wash. It increases incentives to take jobs as opposed to other methods of transferring income to the poor that are not tied to employment, such as food subsidies for poor or welfare payments for the unemployed. Some people say, well, it's more efficient to raise the minimum wage and pay more to the poor that way than to give them food stamps or something like that. It puts at least gives them an incentive to work a little harder, or it gives them a little more free time to go out and get education, then they can get a better job. And you get these kind of arguments, and I could go on and on. It decreases the cost of government welfare programs, which was implied by that earlier statement. It increases technological development, because when a company has to pay more for labor, there's an incentive to either make that worker more productive or invest in better technology, things like that. The thing about automation, though, is that if you replace the worker with a robot, then the unemployment goes up. So again, it's like flip a coin, which is better, which is worse. Arguments against the minimum wage. It's not an effective way of alleviating poverty. Let's see. Hurts small businesses more than large businesses. Okay, maybe a small business